welcome to the Skinny for Friday, May 28th, live here from Studio 2 at WMNF Tampa. I'm back in the studio this week, guys. My name is Ray Roa, editor-in-chief of the Bay Area's nearly 40-year-old alt-weekly, Creative Loafing. As I said, back here live after a taped episode last Friday. But it's just myself today. Our board operator, Skip Sassy, and Irene Matthews on the phone physically at the studio. Mitch Perry, senior correspondent for the Florida Phoenix, is here via Zoom from Tallahassee. Mitch, are you there?
Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. Good to hear you. Mitch, are our elected officials treating you okay up there? Are they treating each other okay up there?
I don't know if they're treating me very well. I actually reached out to a couple yesterday to get a quote, and they didn't get back to me. So, I wish I was getting treated a little better by them. But been wild up here, Ray. End of the fourth week of the session here. A lot of stuff going on. I remember we're going to get into some of it in the show. It's wild. And also we need to talk to our listeners that, we've been doing the Skinny for a little over 2 years now. It's been yourself, me, and Ben Montgomery. Ben, a longtime reporter with the Tampa Bay Times, Axios Tampa Bay, acclaimed best-selling author, is no longer with the Skinny. He has left the show, and we're going to miss him.
Yeah, that's correct. He's a best-selling author. One of his books is about the Appalachian Trail. Grandma Gatewood's Walk, I believe, is the exact title. And that's where he's gone. He's respected the opportunities. I think that book has opened up for him, and he is going to take a long walk on the Appalachian Trail over the next few months. He told me he wasn't sure if he was going to get another chance to do that. So he's doing that. There's also a chance he'll transition from the trail directly to a journalism fellowship at Harvard for the 2025-26 academic year. So as you mentioned, for now, he'll press pause on his participation in this show, which we've been doing together for more than 2 years. He did say that volunteering at WMNF is the act of loving a place and sometimes feeling it love you back. And I know that he really came to love this place in the time he spent here, did some hurricane sleepovers here, and, we hope to hear from him soon. But, Mitch, we're not really going to rush into bringing a third person back. I think eventually we will. But for now, you and I are going to make this work weekly as you finish out the session. And hopefully the listeners will continue to support the show and the station, and we can keep doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do hope I can be here every Friday. It's tough. We've been very lucky. There hasn't been, except for a couple of weeks ago, the session hasn't been going on Fridays. There was that meeting a couple of weeks ago I covered in the House. Ray, it was extraordinary. 3-hour meeting on insurance, property insurance, right? It was all because of this blockbuster story that the Tampa Bay Times reported about a report that had not been released that showed that back in between 2017 and 2019, all these major insurance companies in Florida who said they were losing money were actually sending billions of dollars to their affiliate companies. I think still property insurance remains one of the top issues for all Floridians. And so they held a special committee about that. I don't know we're going to see coming out of that per se. But that was anyway a meeting. I couldn't have made the show for that. So hopefully I can be here. I will be back in a few weeks for Easter week. And of course, we'll be back May 2nd, I believe it is, the last day of session. I'll be actually back in Tampa. So we'll be back to regular programming. But we're going to talk the first part of the show today about LGBTQ rights and what's going on with that up in Tallahassee. As we know, as our listeners know, there's been so many attacks on the LGBTQ community in the last few years. In this session, really, is there anything more that can be done here, basically, about it? We've got a couple guests on I guess we're all on Zoom today.
Everybody is on Zoom today except for myself. So on Zoom with us this afternoon, we have John Harris Maurer. He's the policy director with Equality Florida, and Louis Salazar, president of the Hillsborough County LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus. Louis is also a grand marshal in the Tampa Pride Parade happening tomorrow in Ybor City. Is the connection clear, John and Louis? Are you both there with us today?
Loud and clear, Ray.
All good. Thank you.
Good morning.
Right on. So let's kind of get right into it, Mitch. As you mentioned, Mitch, there was this question. How much more can they possibly do on this culture war front, on this attack on LGBTQ plus rights? But as your reporting has seen just in the last couple of weeks alone, Mitch, there's a whole lot. And Equality Florida was at the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. Louis, I believe you went up there. to talk about this continued assault on the rights and lives of LGBTQ plus Floridians. Folks who took the stand described the state as still ground zero for these kinds of attacks and warned that the Trump administration was going, taking a page out of the Florida playbook. Is that correct, Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got John here. John, of course, is the public policy director with Equality Florida. Actually, John, I found I was on the website for Equality Florida. So you were actually, you grew up in Florida, but you attended university, you were in Texas, and you worked for the mayor there in East Parker in Houston. Is that correct?
I did undergrad in Houston and then worked for Anise Parker's mayoral campaign when we helped elect the first out lesbian of a major American city. And then worked actually in the Texas House of Representatives for a session over there before coming to Tallahassee.
Okay, Texas, Florida. So all the liberal bastions you've been hanging out at.
I love an easy fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be tough for you. So let's talk about, first bill I want to talk about is the flag bill, right, which we've seen the last couple of years here. I think 2 years ago, Jay Collins out of the Hillsborough County area was carrying it, and it got some bad publicity initially, and it never even came up at all really in committee. It did last year. It died in committee. We've got a new measure this year sponsored by Randy Fine, who now has officially left the legislature to run for Congress. And by the way, we're going to talk about that later in the show, about the special elections in Florida next week. But this is, and Jonathan Martin from Lee County is also sponsoring this. So this would be basically, John, we'll talk about this. It would ban local governments and public colleges and universities from displaying a flag that represents a political viewpoint. And that includes, quote, a racial, sexual orientation or gender or political ideology viewpoint. Tell us why Equality Florida really opposes this measure.
Absolutely, Mitch, and I appreciate that history. This is the third year that we have seen the bill introduced. As you noted, I think the first year it did not get a hearing because there was a supposedly accidentally released amendment that would have expressly allowed Confederate flags that did not go over so well. But it is moving through the process. This session has now actually been through 2 of its 3 Senate committees, no House hearings yet. But it is a primary concern for Equality Florida because it is so clearly and explicitly, by the bill sponsor's own words, targeting pride flags. And again, for listeners, this applies to quote unquote political viewpoint flags in any government buildings. So that is certainly something like raising a pride flag at City Hall to recognize Pride Month. But particularly important for us, also things like public schools. And we know just how important things like, a pride flag or that sort of a rainbow safe space sticker can be in ensuring that we've got visibility and signaling to folks, where they can be themselves and be safe and supported. And we obviously talk about this as a flag ban bill. And as noted, not just pride flags by any means. They've clearly stated their intent on the record to go after things like Black Lives Matters flags, what have you. But importantly, as we see in so much of this legislation, the terms aren't defined. So when we say flag, I would venture that most all the listeners have a pretty similar idea of what pops into mind. But in this case, the bill sponsor was asked about it in committee, and he said specifically, it is any representation of a flag. So that is cloth on the flagpole, but it is also, as they've said previously in committee, things like a rainbow lapel pin, a coffee mug with a rainbow flag on it. And it is just absurd that we might be living in a state where we have to have government approved coffee mugs for our teachers in public schools.
We should also say, and again, we're speaking with John Ellison-Auer from Equality Florida. John, there's also a part of this bill that would allow active or retired members of the armed forces or National Guard to, quote, take reasonable efforts to stop someone from desecration, destruction, or removal of the United States flag. This is kind of wild. And during the hearing this past week, Kathleen Passidomo, the former Senate president, she said, quote, I don't want a retired military person to want or feel that they would have to enforce this bill. I do not want to see a 90-year-old veteran getting into an altercation with someone twice his size. I can't believe they're going to keep that in the bill. I don't know.
It really is outrageous and has been made clear, again, in committee that applies on private property. So in theory, your neighbor could walk onto your property if they think you are, quote unquote, desecrating the flag and not, properly honoring it, to go remedy that situation. And Senator Polsky in the first hearing asked and confirmed, it might have been Senator Arrington, there's no training on what constitutes desecration of a flag. There's no training for anybody on what reasonable force is that could be used in those scenarios. So it is really a dangerous provision that just feels like grandstanding and has no point in our state laws.
Let me ask a question here, Mitch. Obviously, this applies to government buildings, but how long until this infects, the private sector? Louis, I'm wondering if you could provide some insight here, because locally, I've talked with a lot of business owners and leaders of certain firms and things like that who've been treading lightly on their diversity messaging out of an abundance of caution, be it Black History Month or anything like that, because the feds are obviously watching this kind of stuff. And talking with business leaders, Louis, locally, how scared are they? I mean, this weekend in Tampa, we're going to see an abundance of pride flags and a very loud display of support for the LGBTQ plus community. But how long until bills like this, should this one pass, until they start to infect private businesses, Louis?
So right now what's going on is privately, take, for instance, Tampa Pride, right? Tampa Pride has had sponsors for years, big corporations that have come in that, help put on the event. This year, big corporations like Chase Bank, the Hard Rock Casino, they backed out. And some of them even asked for their money back. Right. So that's how it's impacting our community right now, to have these visible spaces for our community to celebrate who we are. And business owners are going to be impacted by it, because they're going to be like, well, when do I cross the line, right? What flag can I have? What flag can I not have? And if I do display this, how is it going to scare customers away, or what's that going to do for my business, right? So it's already impacting them, and it's impacting our community as well, because when we have companies and businesses that do support us and do support the LGBTQ plus community, and they're given these laws and these restrictions, they now have to tread very lightly on what they do and what they can't do.
Yeah, I was going through photos of 2024 Pride for our Creative Loafings issue, which is on stands now. And there were all these corporations in there, and elected officials too. And I was wondering, how many of them will be back? John, a question for you, just because Equality Florida is so good at its messaging, at organizing, and being effective when it comes to making sure that, voters understand what's going on in Tallahassee. What has been Equality Florida's messaging to these private corporations as this so-called crackdown on diversity happens at the federal and now state level?
Absolutely, and I think Luis is totally right on all those points. We are continuing to encourage corporate partners to stand with our community, and reflect the values that they often message on and hold out there. And we've seen where some companies have really done that and stood by their communities and those values, like Costco, and have done well for it. So unfortunately, we're seeing, I think, a lot of sort of bullying of the private sector and corporate sector on these issues, and relieved to see that some businesses are now coming, I would say, almost back into the fold after things like really overt hostility and attacks on Disney, what have you. I think there is a cooling of that culture of intimidation and top-down pressure, but we've got a long way to go, I'll say, just to make up the space and sort of get those sponsors back, and then go on to improve on where we have been. But it is trending in the right direction.
I want to bring up another bill that was went through committee this week, John Harris Maurer, and that was, of course, it's been called the Freedom of Conscience in the Workplace Act. This is sponsored in the Senate by Ocala Republican Stan McClain. It says that an employee in a public workplace may not be required to refer to another person using that person's preferred pronouns if such pronouns don't correspond to that person's sex at birth. It also says a public employee or contractor similarly cannot require his or her employer to use their preferred pronouns under the same circumstances. Additionally, job applications in public workplaces may only ask an applicant whether they are male or female, and not provide a non-binary option. It also says no government employer could punish an applicant, employee, or contractor because of their religious, moral, conscience-based, or biology-based beliefs, including if they oppose same-sex marriage or disagree with gender ideology, whether at or away from the work site. I know Equality Florida has real issues with this legislation. It didn't come up last week. There was a huge, huge crowds have been at these committee meetings for this particular bill. Tell us, John, why your organization, again, is really opposed to this particular piece of legislation.
Absolutely. So this is Senate Bill 440. We refer to it as Don't Say Gay or Trans at Work. As Mitch noted, we've seen tremendous outpouring in the Capitol this session just last week for Pride at the Capitol, and then it was immediately followed by a March for Transgender Visibility. We had about 400 advocates up in Tallahassee. So while we're seeing a fraction of the expressly anti-LGBTQ bills introduced this year as opposed to the last two sessions, they are still waging some of those battles, and we're continuing to show up for the fight. This one, the Don't Say Gay or Trans at Work bill, is really enabling anti-trans discrimination and harassment in the workplace when it comes to things like pronoun usage. And we all just want to be able to go to work, provide for ourselves, and exist sort of in that space with dignity and be respected by ourselves and our colleagues. This is also, to Luis and Ray's earlier point, an issue where I think we're seeing framing from the proponents that say, well, this is just about government, but it is broader than that. And it is, potentially the camel's nose under the tent. The thrust of the bill is largely about government employment. But when it comes to things like pronoun usage, it is not only among government employees, which would be bad in its own right if it were just that still. But essentially it's saying, any person who comes into that, agency office for service as a tax-paying Floridian can also be disrespected in that same way. And there's no recourse for that sort of intentional misgendering and harassment of those, folks who are just trying to receive services. It also refers to, again, not just government agencies, but any contractor. And we know there are legions of those, again, business interests that have some state or local government contract. So the impacts spread much more broadly than the idea of we're just doing this for, our own state agencies.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah. Okay. No, Ray, I'll defer to you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to invite our listeners, if they wanted to join in on the conversation here with John Harris Maurer and Luis Salazar, they can send a text to 813-433-0885. Send an email to dj@wmnf.org, or go ahead and call the studio, 813-239-9663. We're talking all things Pride ahead of the Tampa's Pride Parade. A lot of legislation, surprisingly, unsurprisingly, however you want to look at it, coming out of Tallahassee. We're discussing all those things. Back to you, Mitch.
Yeah, I just want to say, a couple things, but go back to you, John Harris Maurer. These are two bills we talked about here. I know you did talk about, you had a big press conference a couple weeks ago talking about how it's, the last year you killed, most of the bills that were out there last year. They were going after the LGBTQ community. And the state has done, under Ron DeSantis' leadership the last few years, a lot on this front. Other than these two bills, is there anything else out there floating around that you have? I mean, I know you do outside of, I see you at a lot of other meetings there that are going on that don't necessarily relate to the LGBTQ community, but anything directly on the LGBTQ community as well as these two bills we're talking about?
There is. And to your point, I mean, a lot of bad legislation out there that we are fighting. One in particular that is a top priority for us because it does have so many potential impacts for the LGBTQ community is Senate Bill 420, which is coming up in its second committee on Tuesday this coming week. And that is an anti-DEI and local government bill. It is frankly so sweeping and was so unconstitutional in its original form that I was pretty shocked it even got a hearing, and I'm still surprised that we're talking about it. But it addresses any official action and says, directly or indirectly, including but not limited to ordinances, resolutions, programs, policies, it mentions funding that has anything to do with DEI. And there's a really, I'd say, broad but vague definition of what DEI is, referring to any differential treatment on the basis of sex, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, what have you. And it just has so many potential implications when you look at things like, does that mean the city of Tampa can no longer provide security and law enforcement for a major community event like a Pride, let alone could they sponsor it? Could they issue a Pride proclamation? But I mean, we have public health systems in the state that are run by counties. Does that mean Broward Health can no longer have a Black infant mortality program? Let alone, again, recognizing Black History Month, or where I live in Leon County, we have a commission on the status of women. So it's just so sweeping, and it combines this really vague language with the idea that now any resident can bring a lawsuit for DEI claims by the local government, city or county. And that just creates this sort of bomb in our local affairs, local ability to respond to first community needs, that the LGBTQ community is within that blast radius.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, John.
If I might
go ahead,
add, Ray.
Yeah.
If I might add, and I was there for part of this session when we were talking about this, and what John's talking about is correct, but another thing that we're going to be missing out in is funding. Right? Funding for jobs, funding for education, funding for healthcare, because these DEI restrictions are going to cut that funding off. That means less people in Florida getting the essential needs of healthcare, education, and being able to live being able to have a good job. Right? So those are going to go with those as well. That's the ultimate thing that's going to be gone.
And we should have local governments should have those abilities to respond to different community needs. We shouldn't be treating everybody the same. I'm male by every definition the state of Florida wants to use. I don't need a pap smear. Like a county health organization does not need to provide that service to me. It makes sense that we have different programs for different needs. And you look at things like sickle cell, and it's different prevalence in different communities. So this idea that we're going to defund all of these things, stop local governments from doing that. And it also has a penalty for any local city or county commissioner who votes for a DEI initiative, that they can then be removed from office by the governor, which we have seen how willing he is to remove duly elected officials.
Definitely. I was just on the phone.
I did not know. I'm sorry. I was to say that, I haven't been following that bill. I mean, we're following so many different bills. I did watch a little of the discussion, the last committee meeting about, I think maybe Senator Polsky talking about sickle cell, actually, again, or some of the legislators did, about that specifically, how healthcare, you have to attune it to different communities. That's just like good healthcare. And the fact that they're encroaching that area is really something else. It really is. I mean, I get the fact that DEI is like DOA, like in America right now under the Trump administration, it's like the worst thing happening. But I did not realize until you're just telling us right now about the implications of how far-ranging that particular piece of legislation is. Yeah,
it's about, spite and far-right primary politics, but it has real implications for everyday lives and people's health and welfare in the state. And I wish our lawmakers were more conscientious of it when they filed these things and then start getting them moving through committee.
A text from Bubba here. All this anti-DEI BS just shows that MAGA idiots are the true snowflakes. Why do we need to cater to these small men and women? It's pathetic. It's interesting to hear you, John, talk about, possible preemption from the state on these things. Yesterday during Tampa City Council, Councilman Alan Clendenin, who was just a guest on Down and Dirty before us, at the end in New Business, just very casually, brought forth a proclamation for Tampa Pride tomorrow, which will be presented before the parade, but it just passed unanimously without any kind of friction or anything like that. And you wonder what the future of stuff like this is. And John, I know we don't have you as long as we have Lewis. I wanted to ask you talked a little bit about resources and thinking about resources at Equality Florida. If you would, come with me to an alternate universe for a second where these kinds of bills aren't getting filed. What kind of work could Equality Florida be free to do in that situation if it wasn't, trying to put out all these fires?
There is tremendous progress that we could make. And that reality is not that far away. Within the time I've been in this position, and I'm not that old, we had 19 Republicans signed on to our statewide non-discrimination legislation. There was a really big, moderate consensus behind LGBTQ equality and inclusion. And so right now, to your point, so much energy just goes to defense in the Capitol. That really is our mission first and foremost. But there are proactive policies out there, and there are good LGBTQ bills that unfortunately have not gotten up in committee yet. Some of that is frankly just undoing a lot of the harm that we've seen recently when it comes to things like restrictions on gender affirming care, expansions of book banning. But, there really are a lot of places where we could do better. And we saw a sliver of that, I will say, to their credit, last session when a PEP access bill passed the legislature, the first proactive piece of LGBTQ legislation in recent history. But there's so much more that we could do there when it comes to the health space and health access for, again, unique community needs, or the education space. So I hope that we will get there. And I think that we can, we are marching towards something. It really does mean something, and it's a hopeful sign that fewer bad bills, expressly anti-LGBTQ bills, have been filed this year. And maybe our hope is that that shows that lawmakers are sort of getting tired of the distraction and cruelty of these culture war bills that aren't serving anybody's interests. When you talk about those things like insurance that they have had some focus on and should be focused on, to Mitch's point earlier. More time on that, less time attacking, a bill that was filed this session addressing neo-pronouns. Mm-hmm. I do this for a living, and I had to look up what a neo-pronoun is. So let's address actual issues.
We have another text here, and it's not signed, but I think either Lewis or John, I think you would be great to respond to this, because I think it is a question that a lot of people pose, especially from an anti-trans kind of standpoint. Can someone explain to me why an adult minus a parent or doctor should be talking to a child age 17 or younger about their sexuality?
Look, as an LGBTQ plus person growing up in a small town that was not okay to be gay in or not to be LGBTQ friendly in, I wish I would have had a conversation with someone about who I was. It would have saved me a lot of turmoil in my life. I would have not been thinking that something was wrong with me or that I was broken. These conversations do need to happen with parents, right? With mom and dad. And it's something that we need to, as a society, make okay, right? It's okay that there are people that are LGBTQ out there, and it's okay that this community exists instead of fighting at every corner we have, right? And now I live in a community where I'm still fighting an uphill battle because it's Florida, right? Let's face it. But we are trying, and we are out there. And for someone to have a conversation with someone under the age of 17 about what's going on, right? It could save their life. That's why it's important. You could save a human being's life from suicide, from thinking their entire life that they're wrong or broken or that they just shouldn't exist. That is not how we should be wishing upon any one of our children. And I ask any parent out there, would you want your child to suffer like that? Right? What would you do in that situation?
John, anything to add to that?
I think Luis is spot on. Mm-hmm. And it is not that anybody is trying to exclude parents or other figures from those conversations. It's, I think, about where there's the comfort to have them. I mean, I consider myself tremendously lucky. My parents are wonderful, supportive, what have you. But I was one of those young folks who was still just inherently terrified to talk to them about it when I was getting ready to come out. And so, I talked to my high school guidance counselor before I talked to my parents. It was just where I felt more safe. And we know that today our young folks are coming out younger and younger. And the first place they often do that is to a friend or somebody online, and then also in schools, and then to family members. And so we wish that everybody's, had that really supportive family network, and they felt first and foremost comfortable doing so there. But again, to Luis's point, it's just about making sure that there is someone who can offer that support and make sure that, our young folks aren't just struggling.
And John, I don't want to cannibalize all your time, and I know we want to talk to Lewis about some stuff, and Mitch, don't let me exclude you. But I'm wondering, John, if you could maybe give us a little bit of insight into how Equality Florida's work inadvertently also protects the rights of straight people, so-called, straight people, because, some of these issues aren't exclusive to the LGBTQ plus community.
Absolutely. There are so many different answers to that question. I really appreciate it. The most basic one, and the one that has me banging my head against the wall most often in the legislature, is when you look at these policies, they are virtually always written, in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity. And we so often lose the perspective, or I'll say sort of our opponents in the process, lose the perspective that everybody has a sexual orientation and a gender identity. So when we talk about things like, hate crimes protections on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, non-discrimination on those bases, that applies to everybody, not just the LGBTQ community. And in fact, there is a case before the Supreme Court right now where a straight woman is arguing that she was discriminated against and passed over for a promotion in favor of two lesbian women, I believe, in that case. And that is a reasonable claim. If you are saying sexual orientation and gender identity, it protects everybody, not exclusively the LGBTQ community. More broadly, how does our work, benefit broader constituencies? I feel like we're really seeing that this session. And we've already alluded to how hard the recent sessions have been. And a lot of that has focused really specifically on particularly the trans community within the LGBTQ community. And what we have said as we sort of call folks into that fight and help them understand why it is so important is not only, though it would be sufficient, that we have to stand with our transgender siblings and our membership, but also we can see the playbook that they're running. And while they may have started attacking the trans community because they felt like it was the most politically expedient or what have you, they were sharpening their spear for the next battles. And so this session, there's a whole constellation of legislation that seeks to sort of take the next run at these anti-DEI approaches. And it is not just about the LGBTQ community by any means. In fact, most of these bills don't refer to the LGBTQ community at all, but they are rolling back and striking any programs that acknowledge basically diversity in any form. So where there is recruitment, supplier diversity, what have you, striking those programs. And it is astounding. Sorry, I'm soapboxing here for a minute because I feel strongly about this area. To see where they're seeking to strike from statute existing legislative findings that say there's a history of racial discrimination and we are putting these policies in because there's a compelling state interest to remedy these. And so now they are striking that and saying we now no longer need supplier diversity or minority business programs. And so, those programs, frankly, have rarely, if ever, benefited the LGBTQ community. At least anecdotally, I think women-owned businesses are the biggest beneficiaries of those. But again, we know that it's important to show up for all these fights. As Luis has seen in the Capitol, when we all mobilize together, there are added benefits as well. The last 2 weeks, we particularly swamped the Senate Government Oversight Committee with tremendous turnout, not just Equality, but our partner organizations, Equality Florida, but our partner organizations as well. And with that, kept two bills off of the agenda. One that was very much in that lane of anti-diversity in state contracting and minority contracting programs, and also a big union busting bill. So there are so many benefits when we all understand and see the strategy of how we're tied in this process.
John Harris-Maurer, Policy Director with Equality Florida. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us this morning.
Thank you.
And let's go. Let's come back to Tampa here from Tallahassee to Tampa. Lewis, you have Stuart Milk, nephew of the late Harvey Milk, in town to help with the Rex Fund Pride fundraiser. Stuart is you're a Grand Marshal in the parade, and he's one of your fellow Grand Marshals. The monies that you guys raise at this, and just by the way, we can't talk about cover charges or anything on WMNF, but the monies that you raise here will go towards sending LGBTQ plus candidates to train at the Victory Institute. It's a 32-year-old organization with a mission to quote unquote build, train, and support a diverse pipeline of LGBTQ plus leaders who can advance equality in public office. Lewis, besides yourself, what does that pool of potential candidates kind of look like right now, locally and beyond?
Well, right now, first of all, there's no cover charge, so anybody that wants to come, you're more than welcome to. Donations are suggested. I want to have people there to celebrate Stuart Milk and all the wonderful things he's done for our community. But having LGBTQ representation at every level of government is important because you need to see yourself in that chair, right? That happens with all marginalized communities. That happens with me as a Latino, right? I like to see Latino leaders leading so I can see other people there as well that know what my struggles are, what I'm going through. LGBTQ representation right now is actually, we have some here in Tampa. We have Ellen Clendenin. We have the mayor. We have Lisa McClain, all great human beings that are doing great work, right, in our city. And so this allows us to be able to train more people right now, to send them to the Victory Institute, to see what it is to run a campaign, what it is to raise money, right? And what steps they have to do to get to the level of these people that are already leading in our community. And it's important, right? It's important to see ourselves in the steps of our leaders.
Lewis, WFTS did a great job with you in profiling your upcoming Grand Marshal position. And I noticed yesterday as I was driving through Ybor, Disco Pony opening up in the old Attic Brothers space. And before that was MC Film. It felt a little bit like a gay bar throwback for me. And you're a young guy. You've alluded to this a little bit on the show already, but you didn't have a gay bar or place growing up. And that's not really the case for young folks now, especially if they live in Tampa. How worried are you about Tampa's gay-friendly vibe going away as the voter demographics change in this county?
Well, I'll tell you, as long as I'm here and as long as the Hillsborough LGBTQ Democratic Caucus is here, we're going to fight for those spaces because that's where LGBTQ people feel safe at and where they go to express themselves. But it is worrying, right? Development's coming in. There's people that are changing the way the city wants to look, but that's been there for a long time. It's a history of our history here in Tampa. And we want to protect it. Disco Pony's coming up. There's been other bars that have come and gone. Each one has a special heart and a special place in all our hearts. Right. I have memories at places that are no longer here. Valentine's, which is no longer here.
Here we go. This is what I was hoping to get into as well.
Yeah, and it's sad to see them go, but I love to see our spaces thrive, and we have to support them. We have to continue to support the queer spaces where people like me, that I grew up in a little desert town that the nearest gay bar for me was about an hour and a half away, and there was one, right? And it was rare access that we need to provide spaces so young people don't grow up feeling like this is, like I said earlier, not normal, or that there's something inherently wrong with you because of the way you feel or who you are, right? And we have to also celebrate, I'm going to tell you right now, Ray, those people that have fought for us to get here. And it happened in those spaces, right? Revolutions happened at Stonewall. Right, they happen in bars and the places where we went to meet. I meet drag queens every day that are fighting for democracy. It's just the way it's who we are as a community. It is our salon, if you might want to call it that.
Yeah, for sure. And something we didn't get to talk about with John, but and it's in the reporting here from Mitch, and John kind of alluded to it. There are a lot of people who take time out of their day, and they come in. and they show up in front of these elected officials in a very public way. That is not easy to do. For the safety of your job sometimes and for your own personal safety. Can you give us a little bit of insight, Louis, into the people that you met who went up with you there to Tallahassee and what it takes to kind of show up for this community and the risks that they take?
The one group of people that I really loved seeing there was young people, right? Because it's time for them to take the reins. It's time for them to get their feet wet and get in this battle. And they have been. And I want to give kudos to Equality Florida, because when we went up for Cap Pride at the Capitol, this was the first session I ever went to where I got to actually speak to as many legislators as I did, right? We also had a great leader. His name was Jeff Nall. Shout out to him up in the Emerald Coast. He took us and he took us step by step, right? Who's going to take this position? Who's going to be the greeter? Who's going to be telling the story? Who's going to be doing the roles in talking to the legislators in order to become effective, right? Because when you're talking to legislators, it does take a lot of guts, right? Because you are putting all of yourself up there, but you're also trying to connect with people. You're trying to connect with another human being about why this is important to you, why any legislation is important to you, how it's going to affect your life directly. Right. I like to call it, I know this is going to sound kind of funny, but have you ever seen the show Intervention? And when they all meet at the end and they have their letter, right? They're like, your addiction has affected me in the following ways, right? That's how I feel when I go up to talk to legislators. Like, I'm sitting down with them and I'm having an intervention with them. Dear Mr. Legislator, your policies are affecting me in the following ways. And what's going to happen now is XYZ. Right. And we have to keep them accountable. Right. If they promise to protect us, if they promise to represent us, then we need to make sure that happens. And being afraid of that is something I would tell you that I didn't see at the Pride at the Capitol. People that were there were dedicated. They were loud. They were boisterous. And it's inspiring, to be honest with you, to see how our young people are stepping up. I often tell people in spaces that it's no longer about me. It's I'm 43 now. You know, it's
you're
I'm
washed,
getting up there.
Louis. You're washed.
I'm getting up there in the gay years. But it's no longer about me. It's about the world you want to live in and what you want to see in it. And it's important that whatever we do in this world, right? If you want to see good, you leave good. Right? Make sure that whatever you're doing is leaving a positive impact for the people that follow you. Because if you leave horrible things like these bills and hate and discrimination and all these things, no one's going to want to remember you. No one's going to want to be, hey, remember that guy that used to sit in the corner and yell discriminatory words at us? Nobody remembers that guy. Nobody wants to. Who they do remember is the people that change their lives and the people that fight for them. We remember Harvey Milk, right? We remember people that fought for us and that took that extra step. And although we can't all fight in every corner, right? We want to. It's I wake up every day with anxiety sometimes, wondering what else is next, right? What's coming after me? But it's important to remember that you need to take care of your corner. Take care of the corner where you live. Make sure it's healthy. Make sure that people are okay. Make sure that people are getting the things they need. Make sure people are supported. If we all did that, I think our world would be a little better. And when we all do that together, communities change, right? We were able to take over precinct 305 with the caucus, and that's one precinct out of hundreds in Hillsborough County. And because we did that, we increased voting there by 20%. That might not be huge to a lot of people, but it's huge to us because it's our community.
Louis Salazar, president of the Hillsborough County LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus. Stay with us, Louis, please, because I know Mitch wants to talk about elections here.
Yeah, absolutely, Ray. Again, resetting for our listeners, if you're tuning in right now, you're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM, 11:49 a.m. Ray Roa down in Tampa, Mitch Perry here in Tallahassee with Louis Salazar. So I did want in the last 10 minutes talk about the special elections that are taking place next Tuesday, excuse me, in two Florida congressional districts, District 1, which is the Panhandle area, arguably the most conservative district in Florida, and also in District 6. Now, these are the two seats that were left because Matt Gaetz in District 1 was selected by President Trump at one point to be the next Attorney General. That didn't work out. But also in District 6, Mike Waltz, who's been in the news a lot this past week with this whole signal controversy, right, the National Security Advisor, he left that seat. So you have those 2 congressional elections taking place, and it's gotten a lot of attention for a couple of reasons. One is basically, of course, because the Republicans only have a very slim lead in the House of Representatives. They've been waiting for this election to take place for a long time so they can get theoretically 2 more Republicans back into Washington, because these, again, are very Republican seats. Both these seats were won by Republicans last November by more than 30 points. Trump won the District 1 seat, I believe it was, by 37 points, right? So these are very red seats. So why are we going to talk about them? Well, because, in fact, there's been incredible financial contributions coming from around the country to the 2 Democrats running in these races, Gabe Alamont in District 1 and Josh Weil in District 6. I mean, big time disparity in financial contributions. And in the District 6 race, that is concerning some Republicans. Now, again, I wrote a big piece about this earlier this week. There's really nobody's going to go on record and say that Josh Weil is going to beat Randy Fine. But the poll was, okay, there was a St. Pete polls that came out, survey came out a couple days ago, had only 4 points. Again, this is a race that the Republican won by 30 points back in November. Right now, it shows Republican Randy Fine with just a 4-point lead. Now, again, was one poll there. I read today that Tony Fabrizio, who's Donald Trump's pollster, had a Weil leading, which, is insane, right? But so this is also interesting, though, because I've seen some criticism by Democrats in here in Tampa area about that this has been people giving their money and they've been sold a bill of goods. This is just good for consultants because, in fact, these are 2 races that really Democrats can't win. And so, therefore, they're getting taken advantage of, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd love to get opinion on this. I just want to say this, though. What you're seeing here, because I covered a town hall meeting in Tallahassee this past Saturday, and we know there was one in Pinellas last week, too, right? There is, obviously Democrats have been down and out for several months since the election. That is changing now. We are seeing these public displays of emotion, of anger, what was going on with Doge and with other things with President Trump and Elon Musk are doing. And these 2 races are basically the only game in town, right, for people. There is I should say, also that big Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, also on Tuesday. But this is a real, I think, expression of Democrats just wanting to do something, right, to contribute some money. And hopefully they are aware that, when they do give this money, that these are still very tough odds. But I do find it kind of interesting that some people are getting almost angry, some of these Democrats, because they think it's a big fleece by consultants, that voters are being sold a bill of goods, and they should be putting this money into registration or et cetera, et cetera. Look, it's hard for people to, people don't want to, from New York, don't want to write a check maybe for Florida for registering voters, right? But they will for an election coming up. So it doesn't seem that crazy to me why you're seeing the big money coming in, but it's still a development that nobody really saw, Ray. So I think that this is coming up again on Tuesday, this District 6 race. And Ken Martin, who's the Democratic National Committee chair, is coming to the district on Saturday and Sunday. And Donald Trump last night held town hall meetings for both Jimmy Patronis, who's the Republican in District 1, and Randy Fine in District 6. So Trump's getting involved. We know he wants to get these Republicans, again, sent to Washington as soon as possible. But I do find the whole thing absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, Lois, what do you think about all this? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to get real with y'all, okay? First of all, the people that are complaining about this, their lives are not at risk. My Latino family is getting deported. Our LGBTQ family is harassed and threatened every single day, right? So we are going to go down scrapping. That means fighting for District 1 and fighting for District 6. The people that are complaining, I don't see them knocking doors in District 1. I don't see them knocking doors in District 6. I just drove a team of over 20 people over to District 1 to knock on doors for Gabe Alamont. You know why? Because my life's at risk. That's why. So don't tell me about the money being wasted or what's going on, right? The consultants are just mad because the consultant that ran that race raised millions and millions of dollars and they couldn't. Get over it. Go win other races. Go win other Democratic races. The consultants in Florida have lost races consistently back to back over and over and over again. So if you're going to complain about money being spent, win your races. All right. I think it's really important for people that are running for office when these consultants come up to them. And I know consultants, they come up and they say, what are you going to do? What's your platform? Why aren't you raising money? The candidates need to turn that around and say, what have you done? How much money have you raised? What races have you won? Show me your portfolio, right? So that's insulting.
Yeah, fascinating. One other thing I want to bring up, Ray, and to Louis as well, is, we're far away from the 26th election, but not really in politics. You're never that far away, right? Always thinking about the next election cycle. We know Byron Donalds is really the only announced candidate right now, the Republican congressman from Southwest Florida, who has already gotten the endorsement of Donald Trump. We'll see about what's going to happen with there, whether Casey DeSantis gets in or not. I would be surprised if she does, although Ron DeSantis wants her to, but we'll see about that. But on the Democratic side, nobody's really talking. We South Florida Democratic Senator Jason Pizzo is considered a candidate. But this week, up in Tallahassee, I interviewed David Jolly, the former Pinellas County congressman from 2014 to 2017, who was there for a brief time before Charlie Crist beat him when the district was redistricted back in 2016. Of course, it was redistricted back to a Republican in 2022. So Anna Paulina Luna won that district back. But nevertheless, Jolly, very fascinating, interesting personality. He's been on MSNBC big time the last, 5-6 years or so. He was an early never Trumper. Well, he is considering running for governor next year as a Democrat. And this is also, I've seen, again, by comments, actually, Ray, on Creative Loafing's Facebook pages, where I get the most feedback in my stories is reading that page. And there was a lot of back and forth on that. I heard from some people, some Democrats I know in Pinellas County, who were like, oh, my God, he's going to try to swindle this over us. He had a bad record on this and that, what have you. And that's all legitimate. Absolutely. But I do think that when you look at the 26th election coming up, to the point where we mentioned about the Democrats losing, right? You're coming off before Democrats. We talked about this on the show so many times. It's how much lower can you get, right? You lost in 2 years, in 2020, Trump, 2024. Trump won by 13 points in this state. Okay, so did Rick Scott over Debbie Muckersole-Powell. You had Ron DeSantis win by 19 points. This is a very red state right now. So I think that for Democrats, everything should be open in terms of who's going to potentially run and who might be a possible candidate. And Jolly's a very, he's a really intelligent guy. I didn't put in there, by the way, he was pro-life. Now he basically says he takes a pro-Roe position. So he has repositioned himself on that. And I think that I don't personally think it's bad if politicians, you can call them flip-flopping, but, they can evolve, right? So maybe we can talk about this more in the coming weeks. And maybe we can get David Jolly on the phone, on the show, Ray. I think that would be very interesting for our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. And Louis, with the last 30, 45 seconds of the show, could you respond? Would you support a David Jolly governor race?
Would I respond with the support? It's going to be interesting to see another former Republican running for a Democratic seat, right? So that's going to be an interesting race to watch. Jason Pizzo is definitely making some moves. If you take a look at his social media, he's creating some accounts that look like they're moving towards a declaration of running for governor, and he has financial backing, right? And that's what we're going to need. We're going to need money. We're going to need money to run a race in a red state. And we also need to continue to push forward that we are the party of the working class, right, as Democrats, that we understand what it's like to make the difference, or make the choice, I should say, between paying the electric bill and having to buy groceries, that we know that people are wanting things like buying a house, buying a car, that are just not possible right now. We need to keep pushing that message forward, and monopolizing on the situation right now, because Donald Trump is not going to do it. Okay. If you look around, things are not okay, whether you want to believe it or not. Healthcare is going away. The Department of Education's gone away. They just declared this morning some other news that, people that, They're going to take away DEI, all the stuff that's going on. When is it going to end, right? So we need to continue. The fight needs to continue, and I'm here for it. That's all I got to say.
Louis Salazar, president of the Hillsborough County LGBTQ plus Democratic Caucus. Earlier on the show, John Harris Maurer, policy director with Equality Florida. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Mitch Perry, live from Tallahassee. Thank you for taking the time today on a Friday, Mitch, to get us caught up. A lot to talk about in the next few weeks, and we'll certainly do that here on The Skinny here on WMNF Tampa. On behalf of myself, Ray Roa, our board operator, Skip Sassy, Irene Matthews on the phone, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for supporting this radio station, and please stay tuned. E-Love is in Studio One, ready with another edition of Art in Your Ear. Have a great weekend, everybody. Be safe, and I'll see you at Pride tomorrow, Louis.
Yep, have a good day.